Good evening. I'm Dr. Donnelly Carrington, Deputy Dean, Undergraduate Affairs, Recruitment, Quality Assurance and Accreditation, Faculty of Social Sciences, the UWI Cave Hill campus. I'll be your moderator for this evening. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Lady Beckles, and other members of the Beckles family, Professor R. Clive Landis, Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Cave Hill campus of the University of the West Indies, His Excellency Mr. David Comisong, Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM, Professor Vereen Shepherd and Dr. Henderson Carter, editors of Interrogating Injustices, representatives of Ian Randall Publishers, other executive members of senior management, staff and former members of the staff of the University of the West Indies, specially invited guests here at the UWI Cave Hill campus, and those tuned in online via UWITV. Members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The University of the West Indies celebrates its 75th anniversary and the Cave Hill campus its 60th anniversary. And as part of these celebrations, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the final event in the calendar of events, a book launch of a festgrip, a collection of articles published in honor of one of its most distinguished academics, international thought leader, United Nations committee official, and global public activist in the field of social justice and minority empowerment. This honoree conceptualized the university's AAA strategy, which committed the institution to leverage its resources and capabilities for the revitalization of Caribbean development. This evening, we celebrate our AAA scholar, who is an academic, administrator, and advocate, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. As an academic and economic historian, this graduate from the University of Hull, important institution, with a PhD in economic and social history, was appointed Professor of Economic and Social History in 1991, who at the time was the youngest person to achieve such a personal professorial chair. He has authored, co-authored, and edited over 32 books, hundreds of peer-reviewed journal articles, conference papers, in which he amplified the extant literature in history. As an administrator, Professor Sir Hilary served as head of Department of History and Philosophy, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Director Founder of the Center for Cricket Research, University Coordinator for Sports, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Chairman for the Board of Undergraduate Studies, PVC, and Principal of the Cave Hill campus. And finally, the Chief Executive Officer of the University of the West Indies and its Vice Chancellor from 2015 to present. Professor Sir Hilary also became a household name in Barbados in the late 1980s as an advocate as he sensitized Barbadians by his participation in the debate related to the Barbados Mutual Life Association, which culminated in that powerful publication, Corporate Power in Barbados, The Mutual Affair, Economic Injustice in a Political Democracy. His role as an advocate has continued even today in his role in reparations. So tonight, we gather to celebrate this AAA scholar, academic, administrator, and advocate in this book launch of a festgrip, a collection of articles published in honor of this distinguished scholar and statesman. So once again, welcome. So our next speaker on the stage shares some of the administrative similarities with our honoree. Tonight, both serve as PVC and chairman for the Board for Undergraduate Studies, and PVC and principal of Cave Hill campus. I now invite to the lectern Professor R. Clive Landis, PVC and principal of the Cave Hill campus, to bring you greetings and give the opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice-Chancellor at the University of the West Indies, and Lady Beckles, and all the other members of the Beckles family. His Excellency Mr. David Commichon, Barbados's Ambassador to CARICOM, distinguished speakers and guests. It is my great pleasure to bring the official welcome on behalf of the Cave Hill campus to this really joyous occasion, the occasion of a Festschrift. So some of you will know that I have a Germanic background coming from Switzerland, and lots of people were coming to me and saying, "Prof, what is a Festschrift?" I said, well, you know, a Festschrift is a commemorative volume of writing, but, you know, it's normally when someone has certainly retired or actually sometimes even transitioned to the great beyond. So to be Festschrifted in your own lifetime is really quite a unique honor. So in deference to the occasion, which is the Festschrift in honor of Hilary Beckles, I've decided to forego my normal prepared speech, and I'm using the doodles on the back of the program. Now, you would know, or anyone who knows the Vice-Chancellor, is that most of his best speeches are doodled on a program. And somewhere or other in the archives, there is a whole collection of these doodles. And I wish I could be a fly in the wall maybe 50 years from now when some poor PhD student is tasked with deciphering what the Vice-Chancellor spoke about from all these doodles. But suffice it to say that this is not the only thing which I've plagiarized from the Vice-Chancellor, his method of giving his speeches. I also was honored to contribute a chapter to this book. And I entitled the chapter "The Triple C Threat to the Caribbean, from Chronic Disease, Climate Change, and COVID-19. That too, I plagiarized from the Vice-Chancellor." That's part of his narrative at various council meetings. But Vice-Chancellor, I think the phrase is, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so I think I hope you'll forgive me for plagiarizing you twice. I really want to thank the editors. I was looking forward to meeting Professor Reed, Ahmed Reed, who I've only seen on Zoom, met on Zoom, and have come to admire. And I'm sorry that he wasn't here. But I really want to thank Vereen Shepherd, Henderson Carter, and Ahmed Reed for editing this wonderful collection. I think we can give them a round of applause. So it's my job as the host of the occasion to encourage you all to buy your books. It makes a very good Christmas gift. I don't know if you've seen the weighty tome outside. It's 1,100 pages, so it's very versatile. It can be used as a doorstop, you know, for squashing mosquitoes or possibly small rats. But please do be generous and buy these books. I would say if weight equates to the esteem in which you are held, Vice-Chancellor, I think this book tells it all. So I think it's only right that we have honored Sir Hilary with this Festschrift as one of the greatest intellects in the Caribbean, and I think I will leave my remarks right there. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Landis. Our next speaker is also from the Department of History and Philosophy, actually serving as the current head of the department, and he would have been one of the authors, as you heard, of the Festschrift. So I now invite Dr. Henderson Carter to bring some remarks.
Protocol having been established, I want to say good night to everyone. Welcome to this celebration. And tonight we are celebrating the long and distinguished journey of my teacher, fellow cricketer, and friend, Sir Hilary Beckles. And I want to address those three things: a teacher, fellow cricketer, and friend. I met Sir Hilary in 1985 when I did the course History of the West Indies. And in those days, we would have our classes in the old ALT. And Sir Hilary would walk in with a little strip of paper like this. A little strip, not the program, a little strip of paper. And he would give a clear, organized lecture full of content, rich in analysis. He would cite primary sources, newspapers, contemporary sources like Long and Legon and Old Mixon, reports from the governors, stipendiary magistrates. And I used to ask myself how he could do this. With just a strip of paper. And Sir Hilary is citing all sorts of sources and giving us a comprehensive lecture so that when he's finished, you're spellbound. And not only was he a fantastic lecturer, but a very prolific researcher who's written, I believe, over 20-somebody books, many peer-reviewed articles, and many of them in the area of slavery, resistance, business history, gender studies, cricket history, and the list goes on. Significantly, Sir Hilary has popularized two important events that happened in Barbados that were laying dormant. The first is the Bussa Revolt of 1816. For a long time, many people did not really study that revolt, did not understand the revolt or the war, as we now call it. And Sir Hilary, through his research in 3 different books, has popularized that revolt, has popularized Bussa, and he has gone further to popularize another revolt that was just sitting there in the contemporary accounts. This is a conspiracy that occurred in the northern parishes, 1675, when an enslaved African called Cuffy wanted to create an African kingdom here in Barbados. And I am glad that he did it because for a long time, black history and our black ancestors, our enslaved ancestors, were not spoken about, were not heralded, were not even understood. And I believe that this is a significant moment that we could honor Sir Hilary today for doing these 2 things, popularizing those revolts that were swept under the carpet, that people overlook. And when I did postgraduate work, I was influenced by that type of scholarship. First of all, I want to thank Professor Marshall for this. I went into an excursion in rum, the history of rum. And Professor Marshall, who's here with us, was my supervisor. And after that excursion in rum, not drinking it, but writing about it, I returned to resistance. I returned to the 19th century, where I studied the 1863 rebellion, 1876 rebellion, and it is there we found Bussa again. After 60 years, people were talking about Bussa. And that confirmed to us that Bussell was in fact the leader of that important war of 1816. So I thank Hilary for leading us in that direction of resistance. I not only encountered Sir Hilary in the lecture hall, but on the cricket field, where you realize that Hilary really loved the university, loved cricket, loved the campus. Now, Hilary played inter-faculty games with us. Could you imagine that? The faculties against each other, and here is the lecturer coming out to play inter-faculty cricket. And I remember one match in particular when we took on social sciences with all the good players and fast bowlers like Matt Lester Burrows and Anthony Wood and Ron Bancroft. And I opened the batting at that stage, and Hilary came at 3. And he manhandled those fast bowlers, hitting them all over the place, and all I did was to stay there at the other end and propped up the end. And we won that match. We won that match. We beat social sciences with all their stars, etc. I also I'm reminded of a match we played in 1988, I think it was. QEH versus UWI. And we were doing very well. We needed 20 runs off 2 overs, but 1 wicket to fall. And we made the decision, I was out there batting, and we made the decision we would sue for a draw. And Hilary chastised us, you should have gone for the victory. And then I remember another match, BCL versus UWI. This is 1987, I remember it very well. I was about to graduate, and we were in trouble. And so Hilary said to me, well, son, you stay out there if you want to graduate. And I put down my head, took fresh guard, stayed out there because I wanted to graduate. But Hilary loved the game, had a passion for the game. And his leadership has led to the creation of significant heritage assets here at Cave Hill. Over on the other side of the road, we have the Quaw Monument, a monument to an enslaved African, Quaw William Jemmett, who came here at the age of 3 without any parents. The women on the plant and the slave ship probably took care of him, who rose up to be the first sexton in the Anglican Church at St. Stephen's. Now, without that leadership, without that research, and so Woodville here did some of the research as well, Quaw would have been forgotten. Nobody would have heard of Quaw. And that is why we celebrate you, Sir Hilary, today, because you brought Quaw up so that people could understand that Barbadians work hard to achieve amidst difficult circumstances. And Quaw is an example for us in achievement. I hope that you visit the monument and you see the 295 enslaved Africans that lived and worked on this plantation in this Cave Hill space. But Sir Hilary has also pioneered the construction of the Golden Stool, which is the new administration building, in memory of another enslaved African Coffee who aimed to replace the British rule in 1675. And again, that is an important monument. But if you go through that administration building, you will see pictures of Africa. It takes you back to Africa. All on the walls. You see a replica of the Golden Stool there. And it is such a magnificent building that whenever I have tourists coming on campus, I take them on the top floor. And they look down and see Bridgetown and all of those wonderful sites. It is a heritage asset in itself. And I hope that we utilize it in that way a bit more. And of course, in cricket, he has created other assets as well. The CLR James Cricket Research Center, the West Indies Cricket Walk of Fame, which by night is a beautiful place. And I encourage you to go to that Walk of Fame. The Whispering Wall. This is a wall, a circular wall, where you whisper on one side and somebody could hear you on the other. Another significant heritage asset. The 3W's Museum, now we know it as the Pavilion, but it is a virtual museum. And so Hilary, you'll be pleased to know that we'll be having cricket tours on this campus, and Amanda Reefer is organizing these cricket tours so that the campus makes revenue from these heritage assets. So I want to compliment you for putting all of these things in place while you were principal. This book is our way of saying thank you for your inspirational teaching, your inspirational supervising, your leadership in research, your foresight in creating heritage assets. Indeed, Dr. Brown and I'm not sure if Dr. Brown is here. Is he here? David Brown? Yes, David is here. We had planned around 2013 to do a book similar to this to honor our supervisor. But two of the students died, Helen Seaman and Mrs. King, and we didn't get those articles. And then, of course, we only ended up with about 6 or 7 articles. And the project flopped. And thanks to Vereen Shepherd here, who revived the project, I think around 2019-20, we now have a much expanded project. And I want to thank Vereen, I want to thank Dr. Brown, I want to thank my wife here, who's here, and my son, I believe, who's here as well, for their encouragement, for their support. And finally, we've come to this position where we can launch this book today, a book of over 41 articles, 1,145 pages, a massive volume. And so, Hilary, we hope that you will enjoy the book. May God bless you and your family. I'm proud to be one of your students, proud to be one of your cricketing friends, to be at the other end while you manhandle the fast bowling. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carter, for your wonderful words and beautiful presentation. The only thing that I am a little bit hurt as a member of the Faculty of Social Sciences, that after you went through your excursion in Rum and Resistance, could proudly get here and say how you beat us. Okay. Now, Professor Sir Hilary has advocated tirelessly in the area of reparatory justice, and in 2013, he was selected by the head of government of the Caribbean community to be the inaugural chair of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which coordinates the Caribbean government's policy positions on global reparatory justice conversation and globally promotes reparations for native genocide, African enslavement, and colonization. So Hilary Beckles, the Center for Reparation Research at the UWI, was established to lead the implementation of the CARICOM Reparatory Justice Program. So in this area, our next speaker would have interacted with Professor Sir Hilary as they share common beliefs and convictions. His Excellency David Commisson, Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM, is an attorney at law and have worked tirelessly in the Pan-African movement. I now invite His Excellency David Commisong, Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM, to give some reflections.
Protocol having been so well established, permit me simply to say good evening, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight to reflect a little bit on my comrade, Sir Hilary MacDonald Beckles. You know, earlier today, we laid to rest a great Barbadian, Mr. Richard Stout. And I had the honor of doing that eulogy. And during the eulogy, I made the point about that there's some special people whose contribution and impact is such that without that contribution and impact, our society would be so much the poorer. And Richard is one, Hilary is yet another. And I want to begin, Hilary, by reflecting on something that happened around about the 16th of November of 2020. I wonder how many people in Barbados remember what happened on that day. But anyhow, that was the day that we took down the Nelson statue. And in the week or so leading up to that day, I was requested by the government of Barbados to contact Sir Hilary, I think he was in Jamaica at the time, and invite him to speak at the taking down of Nelson ceremony. So I contacted Hilary, and Hilary said to me, David, I will be there, but I don't want to speak. All I want to do is to sit in the audience, watch the spectacle, and soak it in. And I said, well, I understand. We will sit together. Neither one of us will speak. We will sit together and we will soak it in. And so said, so done. On the 16th of November, we both sat in the seated area towards the back, and we just absorbed this remarkable spectacle. Not just the taking down of the statue, but the whole ceremony that surrounded it, and the explanation as to why Barbados had come to the stage where we could no longer countenance such a statue in an important public space. And we were saying to each other as we spoke that evening, look how far we have come. Look how far we have come. Because that was November, but in just a couple of months before, in September, in the throne speech, the government had announced that Barbados was becoming a republic in the following year. Look how far we had come. And we had to reflect on the fact that this was 36 years after a young 29-year-old Hilary Beckles had come back to Barbados in 1984 as a lecturer at the Cave Hill campus. And incidentally, Hilary is just about 5 years my senior. 1984 was an important year for me too, because I had just come back from law school and had started in legal practice and politics in 1984. the taking down, the Barbados becoming a republic, and the taking down of that Nelson statue had a lot to do with the fact that this gentleman decided to return home to Barbados in 1984 and to engage in the kind of work that he engaged in as a public intellectual in Barbados. 1984, he immediately went into the fray because in 1984, the University of the West Indies launched a lecture series, a history. The history department launched a lecture series to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the abolition of slavery. And it went on for several years. And that was our first exposure to this young historian, doing what Hendy said he did, because his first area of focus was Bassa and unearthing that very important history for us in Barbados. But that was just the beginning, because that period, remember, 1984, Barbados is still the Caribbean society with perhaps the most entrenched white economic oligarchy. It's still a society in which it is really the colonial history that is holding sway. We are still fighting to find ourselves. 1984, 1986, we have a very important general election. A man called Dr. Don Blackman, perhaps the most popular politician of the day, raises the issue of white shadows and says that white shadows continue to rule the economy of this country. And then the government of the day makes a decision to award a contract to a black construction company over a white one, and Dr. Blackman says, we are doing it to redress historical imbalances. Oh boy. And who steps into the controversy? But our good friend Hilary Beckles. And Hilary raises the issue of economic enfranchisement or economic democracy. And this becomes a major, major intellectual debate in Barbados, a popular debate, not just within academia, but on the radio stations. Activist groups pick up the debate, and the central intellectual at the center of it all is Hilary Beckles. And then the debate coalesces around a very powerful company in Barbados, the Mutual Life Assurance Company, a company that goes right back to the period immediately after the abolition of slavery, a company in which a lot of the slave owners that received the slavery compensation money went into that company, a company that was a bastion in the 1980s of white economic power. Had many black policyholders, but dominated by a white mindset, a white power group. And we formed something called the Association of Concerned Policyholders. Again, Hilary Beckles at the center of it. We formed the Bassa Committee, and the Bassa Committee is not only unearthing the story of Bassa, but it's raising the question of economic enfranchisement and economic democracy. And ladies and gentlemen, I can't tell you the whole story, but it was extremely volatile and heated, so much so that Hilary became the subject of physical threats. I remember us meeting Hilary and you confiding in me some of the threats that had been made and the seriousness of the threats that had been made, because we were basically taking on the entire economic public structure. We were challenging, we launched a campaign to democratize the board of the Mutual, to bring black directors representing the mass interests onto the board. And the whole of white corporate Barbados mobilized against that effort. And then, anyhow, it went on, but suffice it to say, that campaign became known as the Mutual Affair. But that campaign was critical in making a breakthrough, not only making some very serious cracks in that edifice of white economic power, but the consciousness, developing the consciousness among our people that we could not continue to be a society in which white economic power ruled and black people took a subordinate economic position. And I would not go so far as to say that we have totally won the victory, but we have made tremendous advances over where we were in 1984. And so, Hilary Beckles, so that was perhaps what you said, Hendy, Bussa, economic enfranchisement, economic democracy. The history of Barbados. He published the history of Barbados in 1990. I would say the first really serious general history of Barbados told from an indigenous nationalist perspective. And I remember back then, Hilary, we were astounded. Hilary was leading the Bussa Committee. I was a part of the Bussa Committee as well, but I was leading something called the Clement Payne Movement. Hilary had taken up the case of Bussa, and we had taken up the case of Clement Payne, the labor leader of the 1930s. And we were both insisting that Bussa should be a national hero and Clement Payne should be a national hero. But Hilary came out with this book in 1990. And we in the Clement Payne movement were astounded when we saw no evidence that either the university or any of the academic bodies of Barbados were taking this book seriously enough to review it and to hold events like this to discuss it. And remember, Hilary, the first public discussion of that book, because we said you cannot have a book of this importance being published in Barbados and we don't take it seriously and bring it to the attention of the Barbadian people. But the discussion was at the Clement Payne Cultural Center, where we interrogated that book and its importance to Barbados. And then Hilary played a very critical role in establishing national heroes in Barbados. As I said, we started with Bussa and Clement Payne. We worked on Bussa and Clement Payne, educating the Barbadian people, agitating for well over a decade. But when the whole thing came to a head, Hilary Beckles was charged with doing the critical work in identifying the national heroes of Barbados. And not only were Bussa and Clement Payne included, but that movement, I think, brought in several others as well. And then the next major thing, as Dr. Donnelly Carrington implied, the next major area in which we connected was reparations. The United Nations World Conference Against Racism in 2001. By then, we had established a Commission for Pan-African Affairs in Barbados, the government of Barbados. The Commission had learned about this UN World Conference, and we had recognized, look, this is the opportunity, this World Conference, to put reparations on the international agenda. And Barbados mobilized to do so. And Hilary, of course, was the intellectual who was charged with bringing that contribution to the Barbados national effort. So Barbados was involved from day one, from the first Americas Region Preparatory Conference in Santiago de Chile, in Chile, all through to the preparatory meetings at UN headquarters in Geneva, and then on to Durban. And it was at Durban that Hilary was called upon to lead the Barbados delegation. And I was so happy because I had been often leading the delegation in Geneva, and I was facing a number of mutinies. How could you be going out on a limb with this reparations thing, and you put in Barbados in advance of Africa? And no, we have to contact headquarters in Bridgetown to see if we can get authority for this. And so when we went to Durban with Hilary as the head, that same mantra was raised again. Oh, we have to go back to, and Hilary, as leader of the delegation, said, look, we have been given a mandate. It is for us to interpret that mandate and go forward. We don't have to refer back to any headquarters. And so we did with that attitude. Hilary Beckles, Ambassador Dudley Thompson, Jamaica and Barbados working together. We were a powerful, powerful force at that UN World Conference Against Racism. So powerful that the Americans walked out of the conference because they could not get their way. And of course, that World Conference, there were some deficiencies, but overall, it constituted a victory, and it constituted a very important advance in putting the issue of reparations and slavery, transatlantic slave trade, let's call it by the old name, that's what we used to call it back then, being a crime against humanity on the international agenda. And so that was 2001, Hilary Beckles again. 2002, he became principal of the Cave Hill campus. And he held a very important meeting at the Law Lecture Theatre. And the Law Lecture Theatre was crowded. He had just been installed. And he called the meeting to let us know that it would be unrealistic to expect him to be the same Hilary Beckles that he was before becoming principal. That obviously with these new responsibilities, he could not be an activist in the same way he was before becoming principal. And some of us were kind of disappointed by that, Hilary, because we wanted to keep the old firebrand. We wanted to keep the old firebrand Hilary, you know. We love that old firebrand Hilary. I see Gabby is on the program tonight. Gabby wrote a calypso around that time. Hilary is the man for we. When Hilary was under so much attack, Gabby was at the calypso finals at the National Stadium singing, Hilary is the man for we. But the point is, Hilary was just being realistic. Not that he was giving up activism, but that activism now would come through a different prism. It would be an administrative activism. It wouldn't be the same firebrand down in the community, but it would still be an activism coming through the administrative prism. And Hilary, and I want to tell you, I went to Cave Hill between 1979 and 1982. When I left Cave Hill was kind of like a glorified secondary school. Hilary Beckles, as principal of this campus, transformed this Cave Hill campus. He added so much, so many other dimensions he added to this campus. He really, right now, I think K-ville is such a beautiful university campus, and Hendy spoke of many of its features. But a lot of that developmental work has to be credited to Sir Hilary Beckles. And like you, Hendy, I too, whenever I have guests here from overseas, I bring them here to see this as perhaps Barbados' premier heritage asset, you know. So Hilary, we thank you for that. You have given us this wonderful, this gem of a campus that has not only expanded in so much more that it offers, so many more programs, physical capacity, but also in terms of the heritage assets. And I'm going to end now. I'm going to end by saying that Hilary has faced his challenges too. He faced his challenges. He came into a very serious conflict with Prime Minister Frondell Stewart when the then DLP government decided to dismantle Barbados' traditional system of free university education. And they said that they were doing it, but that it would have no impact on student enrollment. You know, they put on these fees, but it will have no impact. Well, it had such a devastating impact that some 4,000 students dropped out of the K-ville campus. And Hilary Beckles found that to be totally unacceptable and took on the Prime Minister and his government in defense of this university and the concept of free university education for the masses of the people of Barbados. And Hilary, we loved you for that. It was courageous. It is not easy to take on a prime minister and a government, but we loved the stance that you took, and we supported Hilary. And again, when he had his other more recent internal attacks upon him from within the university now, and I know I'm speaking on university premises, so I will not say too much, but we likewise found it to be unacceptable. A vice-chancellor who had done so much to expand UE, to put in place the AAA philosophy for UE, to make UE a global institution, to take UE up the ranks of the Times higher education ranking, number 1% in the number 1 percentile of universities across this hemisphere and globally, universities that are 50 to 80 years old. The number 1 university in the Caribbean. And we found it to be unacceptable that this kind of attack was being waged against our vice-chancellor. And we rallied around him. We defended him. And brothers and sisters, the reason why we defended him is because we recognize how important he is to us and to our civilization. And Hilary, I just want to end by thanking you for all that you have done. And I have just touched the surface. I didn't even talk about all the plays he's written. And I mean, this man has just been incredible. None of us knows how he does it, where he finds the energy, you know, and the time to do all that he does. But I want to tell you that your living, your contribution has made a tremendous difference to our society. Our society is so much richer by the fact that you, Hilary Beckles, chose to come back here and to place your intelligence and your intellect, your energy and your services at our disposal. And we will forever be grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency David Commisong, for your wonderful words of reflections. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles is a lover of culture. Actually, he can be described as the quintessential playwright, staging in this very building at least 8 plays, starting with Blessed, a play depicting the 1816 Barbados anti-slavery rebellion, and that was performed in 2004. And the last play scripted by this prolific writer was performed in 2014, was No Country for a White Hero, a play depicting the Barbados revolutionary politics of T.T. Lewis. But I have never heard him sing a single note. I'm not sure he knows the difference between a major key and a minor note, or the difference between allegro and largo. So tonight, the organizers of this festrit, in his honor, have selected a musical presentation for your enjoyment. That would be performed by Dr. the Most Honorable Anthony Gabby Carter, who is affectionately known as the Mighty Gabby, a cultural ambassador for Barbados and a Barbadian calypso legend. This musical juggernaut is not only an entertainer, but a storyteller and social activist. He is an 8-time calypso king whose dedication and contribution to the development of the cultural space will be forever woven into the history of Barbados. In 2012, Dr. Anthony Carter was awarded the Honorary Doctor of Letters from the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. I now invite Dr. the Most Honorable Anthony Carter, the Mighty Gabby, to perform.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Hilary Beckles, Sir Hilary Beckles, might not know this, but he is the one person that had the most influence on me, at least in one area of music, and that's in folk music. Because the many, many, many conversations that we had, and there are many lectures that I attended, and every time that he spoke, I heard a song. Every single time. Some of them came out in the public, such as Take Down Nelson, Riots in the Land, Who Killed Pele, Lizzie, and so on. But I think it might have been 2002 or thereabout that this song came about. I watching Hilary Beckles and laughing. This is great history in the making. A brilliant young doctor teaching at UWI, preparing the future for all of we. Yes, sir. Before Hilary, our history was so distorted. He put things in perspective and well assorted. It is no longer hidden, lie-ridden, forbidden and aborted. This is the second Messiah come, and he have them on the run. Tell them leave Hilary alone. Don't play mad in the saxophone. He is the orchestra, the conductor and leader Tell them leave Hilary for me. He teach history, not his story. So they could ball, they could play, they could play. Hilary is the man for we. They could ball, they could crawl and fall on their knee. Hilary is the man for we. Hilary, Hilary, Hilary is the man for we. Hilary, Hilary, Hilary is the man for we. Oh, 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 oh. The first public clash he had was with Mutual. That was a scandal and bacchanal. By Paul, the whole insurance policy 14. Black people let down themselves again. God, they give the stick to this charismatic leader who was turning back crowds in Steel Shed Theater, trying his best to redress the economic picture. Black people going out on their mind, or the blind leading the blind. Tell them leave Hilary alone. Don't throw mud in his saxophone. He is the orchestra, the conductor and leader. Tell them leave Hilary for me. He teach history, not his story. So they could ball, they could pray, they could play. Hilary is the man for we. They could ball, they could crawl and fall on the knee. Hilary is the man for we. Hilary, Hilary, Hilary is the man for we. Hilary, Hilary, Hilary is the man for we. Hilary, this is true. You became the principal of this institution too. Then you went on and became Pro-Vice Chancellor. What a marvelous, brilliant fella, fighting for we at every turn, including fighting for reparation. We can't ever live to pay you back. That is a fact. That is a fact. That is a fact. Hilary, Hilary, Hilary is the man for we. Hilary, Hilary, Hilary is the man for we. Hilary, Hilary, Hilary is the man for we. You know, back in the early 80s, we had a problem in Barbados that we ain't solved yet. It's called The Beach Belonged to We. And Hilary stood up over there, I think it is in number 3, lecture theater. And he said, Gabby wrote perhaps the most important calypso in the last 50 years, at least, when he wrote Jack. Now, I'm not going to sing Jack tonight, Sir Hilary, but I'm going to sing another song that you love. You tell me to forget that my grandmother was born right there, so all right, I say I shall go. You tell me to forget. It is there I want my own children to grow. Well, all right, I say I shall go. But I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my home my homeland. I hope you know it's true that I would never forgive you, because look at what you do to my Emerton. Oh, you tell me to forget that you bring bulldozers and push down the houses. So, all right, I say I shall go. You tell me to forget. You bring bulldozers and push down the houses. Oh, all right, I say I shall go. But I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. I hope you know it's true that I would never, 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 never forgive you, because look what you do to my Emerton. You tell me to forget that you uproot my people and scatter them to and fro. All right, I say I shall go. You tell me to forget that you did the wrong things and didn't let my children know. Well, all right, I say I shall go. I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. I hope you know it's true that I would never, never, never forgive you, because look at what you do to my Emerton. You tell me to forget my grandmother was born right there, so all right, I say I shall go. All right, I say I shall go. All right, I say I shall go. Sometimes I just sit on the beach and watch the fishermen. Sometimes I just sit on the beach and watch the fishermen. Sometimes you sit by the shore Wave me by and on their way they go. To be many fishing banks, to catch fish without thanks. Bajan, Bajan, fishermen, they'll go to be fishing banks, catch fish without thanks. Bajan, Bajan, fishermen, and sometimes I just sit on the beach and I will talk to the fishermen. Fishermen, sometimes I just sit on the beach and I will talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk to the fishermen. Fishermen, they'll tell me stories oh so rare about some monstrous fish that got away. Then they'll sail out again in the sun or the rain. Bajan, Bajan, fishermen, they'll sail out again in the sun or the rain. Bajan, Bajan, fishermen. But sometimes I will sit on the beach and I will cry with the fishermen, we fishermen. Sometimes I will sit on the beach and I will cry and cry, cry and cry and cry and cry with the fishermen. Fishermen, 'cause sometimes they'll fish all night, don't even get one single bite, and they will come home so sad, come home so sad. Bajan, Bajan, fishermen, they will come home so sad, come home so sad. Bajan, Bajan, fishermen, but sometimes I will sit on the beach and I will laugh with the fishermen, them fishermen, yes man. Sometimes I will sit on the beach and I will laugh, laugh with the fishermen, laugh with the fishermen, laugh with the fishermen. 'Cause sometimes the fishing will be great, them fish will bite at every bait, and they will come home again singing about shark and dolphin. Bajan, Bajan, fishermen, fishermen, they will come home again with the boats back to the brim. The Bajan. Bajan, Bajan, fishermen.
What a wonderful rendition. Hilary, the man for thee, Emerton, and the Bajan fishermen. Give Gabby another round of applause. Now, as I indicated earlier, the prolific writer, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, could write plays, but I don't know if he could sing like Gabby. I myself wish I would have been able to sing like Gabby. I remember as a young boy entering Combermere School being auditioned for the choir. Arriving from the country where Miss Springer will hit this, put a fork on the railing, put it to her ear, and she would start to sing, "Loving Shepherd of Thy Sheep." I arrived at Combermere School and was invited to the platform by none other than Dr. John Fletcher, who proceeded to hit something on this big, black, what I learned after was a piano, and said, "Sing." I said, "Ping." He did not believe what he was hearing, so he hit the white one. I said, "Pong." He said, "You go long." That was my start and end of my singing career. We now move to that point where we would have some conversations with the editors. Dr. Ahmed Reid is not here with us this evening, but he is one of the editors of this Festscript and is an assistant professor of Caribbean history at the Bronx Community College of the City University of New York. He is currently on extended leave and is the former chair of the working group of experts on people of African descent. He holds a BA in history from the University of the West Indies and a PhD in economic history from the University of Hull. Dr. Reid specializes in Caribbean social and economic history, particularly the economic performance of plantation societies. The recipient of a prestigious fellowship at Yale University's Center for the Study of Slavery Resistance and Abolition, Dr. Reid has presented his work at the United Nations Working Group of Experts for People of African Descent, at meetings of Economic History Society, Oxford University, and the Association of Caribbean Historians. He is an author and co-author of several peer-reviewed journal articles, and he's currently working on his book manuscript, Economic Growth in Jamaica During the Age of Abolition. I now invite Dr. Henderson Carter, a senior lecturer and head of Department of History and Philosophy at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, a former secondary school teacher and deputy principal. He's the author of several books, including Business in BIM, A Business History of Barbados 1900 to 2000. This was published in 2008. Powering Our Nation's Progress, The Story of Electricity Service in Barbados 1911 to 2011. This was published in 2011. Switching On with L. Koch for 50 Years, A History of Everston R. L. Koch and Company Limited, 1961 to 2011, published in 2011. And A Man Called Peace, the story of Eric Hassel and his shipping Enterprise in 2017. Carter has also written on Barbadian social history, and some of his publications include Shaping a Nation, Principles of Barbadian Schools 1900 to 1980s, this was published in 2004, and Labor Pains, Resistance and Protests in Barbados, 1838 to 1904, published in 2012. His latest book is Turning Out Gentlemen, Samuel Jackson Adams at Combermere School, 1947 to 1979, published in 2019. He's married to Sophia and has 2 children, Felicia and Kirkley, is a trained tour guide and a member of the Barbados History Conference and the Association of Caribbean Historians. He is also the chair of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society Publications and Programming Committee. Dr. Henderson Carter. Professor Vereen A. Shepard, a trained social historian with a BA and MPhil in history from UWI, Mona, and a PhD in history from the University of Cambridge. She's currently Professor Emerita of History and Gender Studies at the UWI. She's a UN expert, having been a member and then chair of the UN's Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent since 2016, and the current chair of the UN's Committee on the Eliminations of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. She's a published author of 7 books and co-author, edited and co-author of several more, including student readers and texts on slavery and emancipation with the honoree. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Vereen Shepard. Beautiful rose between 2 thorns. Dr. Carter, you've been one of the 3 persons who conceptualized and implemented this enormous project. Tell us about your source of motivation and the energy that gave you perseverance.
Thank you very much, Don Lee. This project was conceived, as I said earlier, around 2013-14. And Dr. Brown, who's in the audience here, was one of the persons who we thought, well, Dr. Brown is a student of Sir Hilary, and we thought that it would be a good idea to honor Sir Hilary by a book, a modest publication, as his students, because Sir Hilary, as you know, has many PhD students. I think it is over 10 or so. And we said, look, it'd be a good idea for his PhD students to honor him, okay, with a book. So that was the idea when we started around 2013. But we didn't get a lot of articles because, as I said, several people died. And then we couldn't get those articles. And then Vereen here took up the project sometime in 2019, Vereen, or 20? 19. And then expanded the project so that we got over 41 articles from Hilary's friends and comrades and fellow historians, not only here in Barbados, but all over the world. And I think it is, we spread the net very wide indeed. And I'm sure that Hilary will be happy and satisfied that we've done that and spread the net. So initially it started with an idea to honor him as his students, but of course it grew bigger than that.
Okay, thank you. Professor Shepard, it is known that you were one of those scholars who was inspired and motivated by Professor Beckles in your years as a graduate student and young academic. Was this the context for your participation, and how do you feel a sense of satisfaction?
Good evening, everyone. I have to say that. Thank you so much for coming out. Absolutely. I am always inspired by Caribbean intellectuals who combine passion, intellect, concern for the people of the Caribbean and for global Africa. And therefore, I was inspired by the lectures I attended by this young academic who combined these kinds of characteristics that I admire. And so I think my understanding of history expanded, especially as what he was doing was almost reinterpreting. So I thank him for the history that I had to unlearn. I had to unlearn, yes. And I think he has passed that on to so many people in the Caribbean and to students in the high schools, because you have to educate the younger generation, move them away from the inherited colonial history and engage in symbolic decolonization.
So, Dr. Carter, you too have been also a student of Professor Beckles, as well as a colleague, and have known him in multiple capacities for over 30 years, as you would have blurted to. Tell us about how he mentored and inspired a generation of young scholars in Barbados history, and how you all became known as the Beckles School of History.
I think Professor Marshall here coined that term, the Beckles School of History. And but look, I mean, Hilary is a great teacher, great researcher, great person to be with, especially the cricket field as well. And we were inspired by all of this. And we were inspired to write resistance history. As a matter of fact, there's a resistance school. And David Brown is part of that resistance school. And I believe Vereen as well, part of that resistance school. And basically, our research took on that line, looking at rebellions, both after slavery and, of course, in the 1930s. And Donley, it still continues. We are still looking for revolts and still finding conspiracies. Up to 2 weeks ago, we found a conspiracy in 1823 in a place called Cambridge in St. Andrew. And so we're still looking for those revolts because we believe that the newspapers and the governors did not really pull out everything and show us everything. So we're still looking for this information. And it really shows the character of Caribbean people to fight back and to demand certain things. And I think Hilary has taught us to look for those revolts and look for those individuals who are not heralded, who we don't hear anything about. So I, for one, I was inspired by that tradition and that trajectory that Hilary took in terms of looking at the underclasses, or what he calls the subaltern.
Okay, thank you. Professor Shepherd, this is probably the biggest book ever assembled as a celebration of a scholar. Tell us about the responses from the authors for the call for participation.
Well, if you have a big intellectual, you have to have a big book. And actually, we had to turn away a few articles. So what you see here does not reflect the number of articles we got. And I apologize if anyone here did not see what he or she thought he or she would see. But we try to accommodate as many people as possible. But the whole project was meant to almost pattern the 10-point plan of the CARICOM Reparation Commission. So we started with indigenous peoples, and therefore people who were working on that submitted articles. because they faced the first onslaught of the terrorists who invaded the Caribbean. And then we continued with, the chattel enslavement, post-slavery society, and one of my favorite sections is writing to right wrongs. Actually, I wanted to title it that, but he wouldn't have it. But I think that's what you do, Professor Beckles. I think that your writing inspired a generation almost to do the same, to look at what we inherited, to expose lies, and to engage in decolonial history. So, but over 40 is still a great celebration of an intellectual. So we honor all the authors. And it's maybe 41, I think, articles, but some people have multiple articles, like my friend here. He couldn't just write one. He had to write about 3. Well, I tagged along, I did 2.
And Ahmed.
And Ahmed, and I'm really sorry he wasn't able to come, but he sends greetings. So it was a big project for a big intellectual, and it took many big hours to put together. But I hope he'll be pleased with it.
And to continue, the book features 3 pillars of Vice Chancellor Beckles: academic, advocate, administrator. Tell us about your perception of these 3 categories and how they came together as a coherent whole.
In fact, if you look at the final section of the book, almost like a postscript, the reflections, you will see 5 scholars who got together to do an online conversation on just these 3 dimensions of our honoree. And Chris Manjapra, a professor who was at Tufts, I think he has moved to another university now, headed that conversation. And that conversation was held during a turbulent time in the life of our Vice Chancellor, what I call the the contract debacle, And what they brought out was the importance of administrators who have a mission, who lead by example, who are intellectuals, and who, in their administration, show concern for the people of the Caribbean, in this case, the people of the Caribbean, but also global Africa, as I said. So we saw someone who embodies those 3 characteristics: administrator, but because he's an advocate and because he's an intellectual, he's able to infuse his administration with the right policies, the right initiatives, and lead by example. And we thought that the articles, and we also commissioned some. Many people volunteered, we sent out the call, but we commissioned others so that those 3 dimensions of this intellectual could be brought out. So it was very easy. You have a passion, you write history, and you believe, actually in Marcus Garvey's words, that history leads us into the future, into what we do. History is the landmark by which we are directed into the true course of life. If you believe that, and if you're an administrator, you're going to know what to do, what path to follow. And that's why I think that it's a great title, or subtitle. But interrogating injustices is also an interesting part of the title. Whether our honoree was writing about gender, and a lot of people don't realize that he took on the issue of masculinity, the issue of power and hierarchy and patriarchy, and that he wrote about enslaved women who resisted the terrorism of chattel enslavement. So those three went together, and that's what he does, interrogating justice, whether in administration or as an advocate in the reparation movement. That's what he embodies for us as editors, I think.
Thank you. And Dr. Carter, Professor Beckles focused on changing the course of historical understanding in the country and the region. He wrote for his peers and for high school children. He wrote plays for the stage. You were part of all of this. You were his student, research assistant, and colleague. Help us to understand a little better the nature of this strategy.
Thank you very much for that question. I started my journey in the secondary schools as a teacher, teaching at St. Anthony's High and then at Queen's College. And we use a lot of his texts, not only texts by Beckles, but texts by Beckles and Shepherd. And those texts were important for helping us to navigate both the CAPE exams with SBAs and that sort of stuff, and of course the CSEC exams. And in the Beckles text, you will find that there are lots of what we call primary material that students could read. So they don't have to bother to go into the archives. You can look at those texts, go into the texts in detail and draw from them the primary material. So he's had a tremendous impact in terms of teaching, in terms of the CAPE syllabus for our students. And, you know, he has another text called Saving Souls. And in that text, you will find that he removes all the footnotes, and it's very easy to read for the students. So a lot of these texts are not written as an academic, but written strictly for students, and I commend him for that. So that sometimes we have academics who just write for academia, but a lot of his writings were done for the students, and of course Vereen as well. And that is very important, that he did not leave the students behind. And sometimes as academics, we forget the community and we forget students, and sometimes we have to factor them in because these are the students who come to us. So I was happy to use his texts in the classroom, and the students really enjoyed them because for the first time we have all these photographs and images of slave ships and images of shackles and images of treadmills, and this really brought history alive. And of course, in the plays, over 9 plays featuring different historical events and persons in Barbadian history, those were important as well to sensitizing us about these unsung heroes in our history. So I think Sir Hilary has to be commended for going outside of academia and ensuring that the man in the street and the students got the education that they deserve.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Professor Shepherd, you've been part of the reparations research and movements and working in advocacy. Tell us about the advocacy role of the historian and how you have been guided in this regard by Professor Beckles as a scholar, an advocate, and administrator.
Well, I think that both Professor Beckles and I have been influenced by Walter Rodney's philosophy. The philosophy that you do not imprison yourself within the walls of academia. You use your scholarship in the service of the people. And therefore, his understanding of groundings, I think, was followed by so many of us. And I think that advocacy, using his intellect, writing to right wrongs, I think that got so many of us into this movement that we have always heard about, I think, but I think it strengthened after what David talked about, the Durban Conference. Barbara Blake Hanna started a reparation commission or committee in Jamaica, and then, of course, 2013, 2014, it escalated with the CARICOM Reparation Commission and the 10-point plan, which Hilary actually drafted. And we, in the Center for Reparation Research, worked on it, edited it, and reshaped it somewhat as new information came forward. So it was easy because history prepares you for advocacy. You cannot read revisionist Caribbean history, African history, and European history and remain the same. You can't. Well, if you do, boy, I don't know how you do that. Because, first of all, when you go to the archives and you are confronted with the evidence of what the colonizers did, you wonder, how do I go down to the cafe and have a cup of coffee and eat anything? You feel sick. So he showed by his writings, he provided the evidence for the reparation movement, like many historians also. And so it was easy to get involved because I was influenced by people like Professor Beckles, who explained, reshaped the history. I was influenced by Elsa Govaya, the writings of Elsa Govaya, Lucille Mathurin Mir, Camille Brathwaite, all these scholars who show that they have a mission to right the wrongs of the past, or to themselves through education, through the history, educate the population, and then get people to follow behind you or walk beside you to call on the colonizers, the former colonizers, to do the right thing. So it was easy, I think, to be convinced that this was something I should join, because my scholarship, my own training as a history teacher, I'm a trained teacher. I'm used to influencing students or try to get them to understand their past, because the past is important for understanding why so many people are now in the reparation movement. But we have to take our hats or our geles off to Professor Beckles, because he showed by example what can be accomplished when people understand their history. And when you use that history in the service of your people, and then have an army, to fight for what the Caribbean deserves. So thank you, Professor Beckles.
And I would now invite the audience to thank you by applauding for this wonderful work in producing this book. So thank you both, and we'd also like to thank Dr. Reed in absentia for his contribution to this wonderful work. So thank you. Here we go backstage first. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles is Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. He's a distinguished academic, international thought leader, United Nations Committee official, and global public activist in the field of social justice and minority empowerment. Sir Hilary is the director of the Sagicor Financial Corporation, PLC, the largest financial company in the Caribbean region, chairman of the Caribbean Examinations Council, CXC, the former chairman of the University of the West Indies Press, chairman of the Caribbean Community CARICOM Commissions on Reparations and Social Justice, president of the University's Caribbean, and an editor of the UNESCO General History of Africa series, and a director of the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center. Further, he currently serves on the Governing Council of the Association of Commonwealth Universities, ACU, and the Governing Council of the United Nations University. He has received numerous awards, including honorary doctorates of letters from Brooke University, University of Glasgow, University of Hull, University of Science and Technology, Ghana, in recognition of his major contribution to academic research on transatlantic slavery, popular culture, and sport. In 2021, he was awarded the prestigious Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Award for Global Advocacy, Academic Scholarship, and Intellectual Leadership in support of social justice, institutional equity, and economic development for marginalized and oppressed ethnicities and nations. Sir Hilary has lectured extensively in Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas, and has published over 100 peer-reviewed essays in scholarly journals and more than 20 academic books. I now invite to the stage Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. And I invite Professor Shepard and Dr. Carter to make a presentation to Professor Sir Hilary.
To present this. That's why we couldn't give two right now, because, we're waiting.
Thank you. Thank you both.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you, Henry.
The pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I now invite Professor Sir Hilary Beckles to deliver some remarks.
Allow me, friends, to recognize our distinguished principal, Professor Landis, our esteemed editors of this enormous collection. And I do agree that you can use it as a substitute for the Flow telephone directory to serve as an excellent doorstopper. I agree. And to recognize all of my colleagues who are here from UE, and of course the entire educational system of our Caribbean world. My family, my wife Mary is here. My daughter-in-law, Kadeen, and three of my 5 grandchildren. Tajari, young man, and young lady, Hilary Beckles. And this was Tajani, who was occupied. And all of you who have been kind enough to come out this evening and participate in this process. And I can tell you that I'm completely and thoroughly overwhelmed by all of this. I am not a lover of surprises, and this one took me by storm. Gratitude is not enough. I don't think I can ever express the level of gratitude I'm feeling at this moment in language. Vareen and Hindi, and of course Ahmed, who have been friends. Forget the relationships of academia friends. I first met Vareen when she was a graduate student, and I encouraged her to go off to Cambridge and do her PhD, get a scholarship, get her off, because she had tremendous ability, and I saw that in her. And she got the scholarship, and off she went. And in short time had completed her PhD and returned to Mona. Hindi, of course, as he has said, he was a brilliant young student. He was curious, he was keen. No surprises that he chose to become a historian and a great scholar. And let me tell you, he's a first-class researcher. Whenever I was stuck and couldn't get a breakthrough, I will call him and I will say, could you go to the archives and check something for me? And the famous moment when we were looking for the conclusive evidence of the prominent role that was played by Bassa in this rebellion. And I remember saying to Hindi, I had a professor at the University of Hull who would always say, if you want evidence of a rebellion or a war, detailed evidence, you don't find it all in the archives of that issue itself. You go to the next issue, the next war. For example, if you want to know about the First World War, all the details of the First World War, you go to the archives of the Second World War. Because in the Second World War, the generals of the First World War were brought forward to give testimony. And it was the testimony of the leaders of the First World War, given evidence, that give us the richest archive for the First World War. And so I said to Hindi, the Bassa Rebellion was 1816. The next major rebellion was 1876, 50 years later. Could you check out the archives of the 1876 rebellion? And he called and he said, Prof, I found it. And there it was, an editorial in the Barbados Times, 1876. And the editor wrote, not since the war of General Bassa have this island known such turmoil. And that was the first time we heard this notion of General Bassa. And there it was in the archives of the next rebellion. And that is how we interacted with each other over the years. I'm sorry that Ahmed Reid is not here. Again, brilliant young student in history at Mona, and distinguished himself. And we were able to secure a scholarship for him to go off to the UK, but to go off to my alma mater. So we got a scholarship for him. We sent him to the University of Hull, and not just the University of Hull, but to the department where I studied, the Department of Economic History. So there was another young West Indian in the Department of Economic History, and was he brilliant. In short time, he had completed his PhD. They all wanted to retain him because he was such a brilliant scholar and researcher, but he chose to return home to contribute to the project that is historiography in the Caribbean. And so these three editors, I can tell you, have been very good friends, and I respect and admire all three of them. I thank you so very much. You will notice that the book is published by Ian Randall Publishers, and this is not a coincidence. you reach a certain moment in your comprehension of academia to realize that academic publishers are very important to the enterprise. I met Ian Randall when I first went to Mona in 1979 to join the faculty. I was 24 years old, and that photograph there is the one with the afro. Yes, that is me joining UE at the age of 24. And I met Ian Randall then, and we have been very good friends ever since. And I have seen him develop Ian Randall Publishers, and I made a philosophical decision that I'm not going to publish anymore with Cambridge University Press. I published a history of Barbados with them. Cambridge is well established. The book I wrote on women was published by Rutgers University Press. My first book was published by Tennessee University Press, and all of these North Atlantic presses. And I said, no, I'm finished with that. I am supporting Caribbean publishers. So, and that is a policy decision that we as scholars must support our indigenous publishers, even when we have a choice. You know, sometimes we are given very large, advances on royalties by highly established presses. And our indigenous presses just want to survive, and they will survive with good manuscripts that will be popular. So we have to make some decisions, and I am very pleased that the editors took the choice of publishing this tome, this monument with Ian Randall Publishers, and the representative of the publishers are here. There you go. We thank you for coming down. Okay. Well, the truth of the matter is that I am just a product of my father, who would just say, get on with it. Stop all the procrastinating and all of the old talk. Just get on with it. And so I found myself in situations where I looked at the reality and I thought maybe I could make a contribution. Maybe I could join forces with those forces already on the ground, and I will just get on with it. There was never a plan. There was never a strategy. It was just a matter of looking at what needs to be done. And if you think you can make a contribution to the evolution of that process, as David said, then you jump in and did the best you can. All of the various contributions that I have tried to make over the decades have been a result of that perspective. When I taught at the Mona campus, the first 5 years at Mona, and the students were always very disturbed that there were not enough examples in the classroom from Barbados history, because the bulk of the literature came out of Trinidad and Jamaica and the Spanish Caribbean, and there were not enough examples by way of comparison about Barbados. And I thought, well, maybe it's a good idea to take an opportunity to return home. I had left Barbados when I was 13 years old. And from 13 to 23, I was in the UK. And then through the efforts of Woodward Marshall, I took an opportunity to go to Mona. And I went there really to Mona. I went on a one-year contract because England was my home. My parents were there, my siblings were there, my family, so I was going to go back to the UK. And so I came out on a one-year contract. Well, it was, now that I'm a vice chancellor, I think it's the most disenfranchised contract that anyone has ever received. And I got this contract and it says, you've been offered a position as temporary part-time, evening, temporary, part-time, 1-year evening lecturer. And I thought I would sign that, and I signed it. And when I came out, the secretary in the department says, I hope you realize that your salary is 1 increment ahead of the photocopying boy. But you know, I was happy to be back in the Caribbean. I wanted to go to Africa. I wanted to begin my academic career in Africa. And when I received the offer of Mona, I had also received an offer from a university in West Africa. And I had these 2 contracts in my hand, and I couldn't make a rational choice. I wanted to go to Africa. It was part of my education. It was part of my social development. I wanted to be out there, but at the same time, I also wanted to come home to the Caribbean. And I took 4 weeks to make that decision. And in the end, I said, you know, there are moments in history, in your personal lives, when logic does not work, where rational choices do not work. And you have to let go and let your ancestors choose your path. And so I flipped a coin and I said, heads I go to Africa, tails I go home. And it came on tails. And I signed the Mona contract. And I went to Mona. I did my 1 year at Mona. Then my colleagues had a farewell party for me. So I packed my grip, as we say. I packed my grip, and off I went back to the UK. And one day the phone rang, and my mother answered the phone. And she said, there's someone on the phone for you from Jamaica. I think he said his name is the Vice Chancellor. And I went to the phone, and it was Vice Chancellor Preston, who told me that Professor Govaya had passed away. And in the year I was at Mona, Professor Govaya and I became the closest of friends because her office was next to mine. And we had many cups of tea on a weekly basis. And he said, well, your colleagues in the history department would like you to turn around and come back. And so I unpacked my grip, I packed my grip, and I went back to Mona. As they say, the rest is history. But I did my 5 years at Mona, and then I received a message that Sir Keith Hunt had been appointed to the principalship of the Cayfield campus. And as you know, Sir Keith was in the history department, and therefore there was a vacancy in the history department at Cayfield. And I saw Sir Keith in the bar. We had a rum together. I congratulated him. And he said, well, Hilary, why don't you come home? I said, I would love to. He said, well, speak to Woodville. And I contacted Professor Marshall, and I said, I would love to come home, and, you know, could you help me out? And again, he took charge, and the rest is history. I came back home to the history department and saw that there was work to be done. We had to build up the stock of writing on Barbados history. We had to enrich the historiography. We had to do this as a project, and we had to do it aggressively, and we had no time. We have to write books and articles and give lectures. We have to bring Barbados history up to the level of Jamaica history, Trinidad history, and so on and so forth. So it was a project of getting on with it. And along the way, there were some interesting moments. The view was that, you know, the African people in Barbados were passive, they were docile, they never rose up against the colonizers as they did in Haiti and Jamaica, and somehow the African people on this island were either intimidated or lacked consciousness, but they sat back and took it. And I thought that makes no sense. And so I threw myself into the archive, and The archive was filled with all of this evidence of the enslaved people here, fighting and striking and demonstrating and carrying out a protracted resistance. And we also had this notion of sail away slaves. Because the enslaved Africans in Barbados would jump on the boats and head off down the Windward Islands, forcing the legislatures to pass laws that any white person who owns a boat and who does not protect that boat 24/7 shall be fined and so on, because no boat was safe. And we saw all the evidence of thousands of runaway, sail away Barbadians in St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and so on. And it's a fascinating history to study what happened with these sail away people, and we have done that. Thus, my work on the indigenous people, where these sail away Africans joined forces with the indigenous people in the Windward Islands and together kept British colonization on the back foot in the Windward Islands. And that history is very important, it's part of our history. But one of the critical moments was when I walked into my normal 4 o'clock Tuesday afternoon lecture on West Indian history, and a young lady in my lecture theater stood up and said, you know, Dr. Beckles, you know, you don't realize that 90% of your students are female? I mean, you come here every week and you speak about history in these generic, neutral terms. But look at us. There are 120 in here and 90 or so are women. Tell us about our own history. We want to hear about the history of black women on this island. And I said, well, there's no evidence. There's no material. There's no material. But I thought, you know, I need to try. And I applied for a year's leave. And 2 years after I came to KFIL, I applied for a year's leave, and I got a fellowship at the University of London. And I had a beautiful office, comfortable. And I said, I'm going to scour these archives to see the specifics of women's history. Within 6 months, I came to the conclusion, this is extraordinary. There is more information in the archives of the Caribbean about women than men. There is more archival data setting out the specifics of women's lives. There's more detail than there is about the lives of men. And therefore, how could we have missed this? And I realized then, it wasn't the material, it was ideological. It was ideological. We, the men, the masculinity ideology, did not see what was in front of us. And I remember saying to one of my distinguished professors in Jamaica, I'm writing this book on enslaved women in the Caribbean. I'm using Barbados as an example. And then came the response. There is no such thing as a gender theory of history. You cannot write history through a gendered lens. But I said, but the information is pouring out of the archives on women. You know, because on this island, first of all, Barbados was the only colony in all of America where for the vast majority of the colonial period, women outnumbered men. Women outnumbered men in both races in the population of Barbados since 1715 to today. From 1715 to now, women have outnumbered men on this island. It has always been a woman's place. They were the majority. And the whole structure of slavery was based on the woman. The woman, the black woman, was the carrier of slavery, not the black man, because the legislation was clear. the birth of a child takes the status of the mother, not the father. It takes the status of the mother. The black woman was the carrier of intergenerational slavery. She carried slavery. A white woman could not give birth to an enslaved child. And in that same 1715 census of Barbados, there's a little category of free mixed race children. There's about 6 or 7 of them. And they are described as free and mulatto. And why were they free and mulatto? Because they are ye extract of a white woman and slave man. So the fathers were slaves, African slaves, the mothers were white, and the mulatto children were born free. Because a white woman could not carry, she was not the carrier of the slave gene, that was the black woman. So when you go through the material on domesticity, on reproduction, plus of course, black women were the majority in the labor force. They were the majority in the labor force for most of slavery. And they were the ones who were going to carry the system into the future. So all of this information is there in front of you, but you don't see men in the same way. Because the woman was perfect property. And in economics, we have the concept of perfect property. Why? Because after you have made the investment, you make the investment, you get labor. She might give you 1, 2, 3, 4 children. Those children are born as enslaved and add to the capital value. By the time those children reach the age of 14, 15, their financial value is more than the mother. So the first child is a return on investment. The second and third and fourth child, what you call pure gravy, pure profit. Pure profit. So the woman is the center of all of this. So it is impossible to write the history of the Caribbean without a specific dominant focus on the women. And then, of course, there are the hucksters, there are the higglers, they're out there. There are the wives, there are the lovers, they are involved, including in prostitution, because the owners of them would put them out to prostitution in the cities. So the cities are filled with these prostitutes who are owned by women, mostly white women. So you have this woman-on-woman enslavement process, and the black women are being described in very great detail. So I wrote the book entitled Natural Rebels, A Social History of Enslaved Women. Why was it called Natural Rebels? Because the thesis was that enslaved women resisted enslavement naturally. It wasn't just only an intellectual construct, because slavery penetrated into the woman's internal, maternal, and fertility issues, because that's what slavery was about. Extracting the fertility of black women, manipulating that to produce enslaved children. And therefore, it went right into her sense of her womanhood. Slavery penetrated deeply into that world, and therefore the pushback, and I said, Natural Rebels. Then, of course, the book was published, and it was reviewed. A very prominent British journal reviewed it and said, it is only now that women are writing their own history that we are getting a feminist perspective. And I remember writing to the journal and saying, well, I'm sorry, but I'm just a man. But the Hilary part got in the way. And then the Manchester Guardian also reviewed it in the female pronoun. So I wrote to the Manchester Guardian, he said, I'm a man, back up. And the editor wrote back with an apology and said, I would like to give you a year's free subscription by way of compensation. So I extracted reparations from a major British newspaper for the injustice inflicted upon me. And so you move from place to place because there was work to be done. David Comachon, Trevor Prescott, the Pan-Africanist movement were all here in Barbados pushing and promoting black awareness and consciousness, creating a sense of the Pan-African world. And I thought, well, why don't I join in? And so I joined in, met David and all of these Pan-Africanists and joined in. And I said, well, the contribution I can make is to bring the archive to the public. So I will dig up the archival material, I would write the books, I will write the articles, and I will make it available to the community. And out of those conversations, I remember one day, after years of effort that we had pushed David, and David Thompson, who was Minister of Culture in the DLP government, called me and said, I would like you to put a team together and create a document which we can take to Parliament to establish a pantheon of national heroes. And I felt this is really wonderful, this is good stuff. And so we got together a team and we wrote a pantheon of heroes. We went from the top of the history down and we came up with a definition of what is a national hero and came up with a list and presented to the government. I can say this, and I think I need to say this. Prime Minister Sandyford was not happy with the national heroes idea. He wasn't keen on that national heroes, and because he was not keen, the minister put the report, what do you call it, file 9? File 13? And so it was abandoned. And then the government changed. The government changed, and here's the famous moment. I think it's like 6 o'clock in the morning. Mayor Motley is now the Minister of Culture. My phone rang early, I answered the phone, and she says, Hilary? I said, yes, this is Mayor. I have just read your report, which was submitted to the previous government. Now, I want you to know that this is the first thing we are going to do as a new government. This is the first thing we are going to do, and you are going to come and give the first lecture on this. And so, Minister of Culture, Motley, pushed it through the Parliament, and that is how we got the pantheon of national heroes, starting with Bussa, Sarah Ann Gill, all the way down to Sir Gary. And we have to thank Mayor for that, because she had the courage and the passion. And with all respect to the dear departed, David, he did not attend the lecture. But when I got home from the lecture, about midnight, my phone rang. And on the phone was David. And he said, Hilary, I apologize to you for not attending the lecture. Because, you know, this is what I wanted to do. I could not do it because I was blocked from doing it. And I felt ashamed to come to the lecture. So, Hilary, forgive me. And that was how that conversation ended, with David expressing his remorse and regret that his cabinet did not see fit to go forward with that. And this is how we are always attempting to dig in. I got involved in West Indies cricket. I love West Indies cricket. And the same thing happened, you know. I was at my alma mater, University of Hull, and CLR James was receiving an honorary doctorate. And I was invited to be a companion of him while he was there. And I flew from Jamaica and I went up to Hull, and it was good. And there was a cricket match being played in his honor. And I was on the field, and at the end of the game, he called me over and he said, I want to have dinner with you. And I went and I had dinner with him. And the old sage said, now, he said, now, Hilary, let me tell you this. I watch you. You can play cricket. You understand the game. But importantly, you are Bajan. And if you're Bajan, you have cricket in your blood. So you can play it, you have it in your blood, and you're a historian. That combination, you must write on West Indies cricket. And that is how I started. I went to Jamaica and I saw Michael Manley and I said, I got marching orders from CLR. Now, at the time, Michael had published his history of West Indies cricket. And we both agreed that his history of West Indies cricket was a Jamesian history that looked at cricket in the age of nationalism. We were becoming independent, we became independent, and we wanted to use cricket narratives to tell the story of the West Indian journey into the world and how we can excel in a competitive way, and this is part of our nationalism. This is good. But then the West Indies team began to crash. And it was clear that something was going on. And I said to Michael Manley, well, the era of cricket and nationalism is over. And the Jamesian school has come to an end. This is now cricket in the age of globalization. Phase 2. This is cricket in the age of globalization. So the nationalist phase is over. Beyond the boundary, well received the manifesto, that's in the past. History of West Indies cricket by Manley, in the past. We're looking at the globalization of Caribbean culture. We now have young men who are saying, don't tell me about playing for my country. Show me the contract. You know, show me the contract. I'm a professional. Show me the contract. The days of sacrificing for your nation, those days are over. We are freelancers, we are professionals. It's a global market, and we are part of that. And I interviewed many of them, and that was the message. I realized that I had to write a book now, getting on with it, write a book on cricket in the age of globalization. And so I wrote in 1998, West Indies cricket in the age of globalization. And in that book, I said, West Indies international cricket will crash in the next 5 years. At the time, there was no IPL, there was no 2020, there was none of that. But the evidence was clear. The trend was there. The philosophy was there. The market forces were there. And critically, I said, West Indies cricket will crash from awesome to awful because we do not have the resources to prevent it. That Australia, England, India, the more developed economies will find a way to invest in their cricketers, allow them to participate in commercial cricket, allow them to be freelancers, but at the same time give them a secure economic base to protect them so that they will play for their country. So they will find the balance between playing for your country and pursuing the remuneration of your God-given talent. But we would not be able to do this. When the book was published, I was invited to Australia, to India twice, and to England several occasions to talk about this. When I spoke about it in the Caribbean, the response was, there Beckles go again with his theoretical nonsense. And it was just dismissed as theoretical speculation. And then it struck us like a lightning bolt. We went from here to here. We couldn't even put a proper team on the field. We couldn't even put a proper team on the field to play for us in Test cricket because all of our stars and superstars. And then I realized that the average West Indian cricketer, unlike previous generations, did not wish to be a hero. They wanted to be stars. And if they have a choice between being a star or being a hero, they would choose to be a star. and all our stars disappeared into international cricket, leaving behind no heroes. Not in the tradition of Frank Warrell and what he had spoken about. So each of the projects I got involved in was just realizing that there's some work needs to be done, and I think I can help out. So I went from one to the next, to the next, to the next, trying to help out. And at Cave Hill, my colleagues in history were so good to me. They protected me from administration. I was writing, researching, enjoying myself, having a ball. And then one day, the principal called Sakiva and said, "Young Beckles, you've had enough fun. You've had enough fun. It's time now to be an administrator. Come and head the history department and come and be dean." And what can I say? Yes, principal. Yes, I would be honored to help out. So I got involved with the administration to help out because I had a free hand and I was so appreciative. I thought it was my turn and I was helping out. But there was an important conversation I had in the corridors of the arts faculty. Some of you may remember that Sir Arthur Lewis, Nobel laureate, first vice chancellor of UWI, when he retired from his North American journey, I think it was Princeton he was at, Princeton. He came to live in Barbados, and our colleagues gave him an office in the Faculty of Social Sciences. And once a week or so, I would go across by Social Sciences to meet this great legend, first vice chancellor, Nobel laureate, brilliant scholar. And we would walk down the spine, down to the SCR, and have lunch. What was remarkable about that was that sometimes we would be in the SCR, and the vast majority of people in there did not know the identity of this man, this elderly statesman, and people, the students didn't recognize him. My generation of academics didn't recognize him. The earlier generation, like Woodville, who worked with him, of course, and I thought, isn't this a tragic thing? But he said to me, when I told him I wanted to do the administration, he said to me, "Hilary, listen, if academics do not learn to run their own university, the governments will send people to run it for you." And that's what he said. He said, I was professor of economics, Nobel laureate, but I was involved, but I took the time out to go and be an administrator, to be the vice chancellor of UWI. Many people advise against it. Why are you giving up your scholarly thing to do this? He went and he did the UWI. He did the first president of the Caribbean Development Bank, because he said administration is important. You know, and you can be a great scholar, but if you don't help out your own institution, your institution would fall and you will carry the guilt. And so I said, yes, I will do the administration. So I did the piece of head. Then I was head and dean. Then the vice chancellor, McIntyre, who was a great mentor, called and said, "Beckles, pack your bags and come back to Jamaica." And I said, "No, vice chancellor, I'm not coming back to Jamaica. I'm quite happy in Barbados. I have work to do here." I have work to do. He said, "I'm sent to you, pack up and come back to Jamaica." And again, fortuitously, I had 10 days to think about it. He said, "I'm giving you 10 days to think about it." And I went home one evening and saw Mary, my wife, at the table in a pretty bad state. And I said, "What's happening?" She had just got the news that her father was diagnosed with cancer and has a short period of time to live. So she said, "I have to go back to Jamaica and look after my father." I said, "I'm coming." And that was how that decision was made. Back to Jamaica. Back to Jamaica as a pro vice chancellor. Again, trying to help out and not paying attention to consequences. You just do what's in front of you. You get on with it, and do what's in front of you and do your best and help out. And that was always my perspective on this matter, especially since I knew that as an administrator of higher education, I could promote and assist something that I believed in, which is making university education available to all who are willing and able. You know, it breaks my heart even now to know that in the English-speaking sub-region, our sub-region, we have the lowest enrollment in higher education in the entire hemisphere. So from Alaska to Argentina, West Indian youth are the lowest enrolled in university education in the whole hemisphere. You know, and that statistic in itself is not only disturbing, it's disturbing because we know that professional training, skills development, academic training is an engine for economic growth. And if your enrollment in professional training, skills development, and academic training is so lowly, how are you going to drive your economy up to sustainable development? So that is the problem that we're having. And thus, as an administrator, I came up with the idea of one graduate per household. Every household on this island should have a graduate of a college, a campus, or professional institute. Because it's the only way to build a country. So the idea of one graduate per household, not just of university, but of the colleges and the professional institutes, so we can smart up the whole population and get the economy going. And not only the economy, but stabilize the society, create a more humane society, and a society with people who understand social peace. So we don't have people terrorizing our streets and our neighborhoods. Bring everyone in. So the efforts were made to just join every conversation. The reparations thing, well, I was always a reparationist. In fact, I think I was a reparationist at birth. I grew up on a plantation. My grandfather was a cane cutter. My household was split between the oppressed cane cutters and people like my father, who was a Garveyite. My grandfather on his side was a Garveyite. He said none of his children must ever work on the plantation. And he had 7 sons, and all of his sons were put to a trade that they could become independent. They were all put to a trade. And my father was put out to the tailor trade. He was an apprentice tailor in Bridgetown to the Moses family there, and they paid for him to have his training, and he became a fully accredited tailor. And that was his position, that his children would never, ever work in subordinate positions on plantations. So that was the Garvey side of my father's line. But my mother's line came from the cane cutting tradition. And I had seen that world. I saw that world when at 8 and 9 years old, I would carry my grandfather's lunch into the cane field. And I have memories of taking, the canister. You carry the canister into the cane field to give him his lunch. And I have seen a teenage white boy on a horse driving big black men to labor. And at the age of 7, 8, 9, I knew there was something inherently wrong about this. I didn't have to be told. My spirit revolted against the image of a little white boy on a horse driving grown men to labor. That was an image from slavery, but that was an image of my childhood. So I was a reparationist from day one. When I went to high school in Barbados, the headmaster came into my grandmother's household at Black Best Primary School and said, this little one, send him to do common entrance. I was 9 years old. Had to go and do common entrance at 9. But they gave me a scholarship and off I went to CP. But when I reflect on my 3 years at Coleridge and Parry, all I can remember is a history class. The history class of a teacher talking about Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution. A black man on a horse with a sword. A black man on a horse with a sword leading a revolution. And that is the only thing I remember from 3 years of history. From 3 years of history, the only thing I can remember even today, from 3 years of history teaching, was this image of Toussaint Louverture on a horse, freeing black people. So when I went to the UK in the Windrush, I went right into the Vietnam War. Every night on the BBC, the Vietnam War, the Vietnam War. The Americans dropping chemical bombs on peasant children. And you all remember that famous image of the child running through the village, having been bombed with napalm, and the child's skin ripped off her back, and she's running through the village with her skin torn off. I was exposed to the Vietnam War. Then while that was going on, if that wasn't enough, there was the civil war in Nigeria. The famine in Nigeria caused by that struggle between the Igbos and the Yorubas. And the horror of starvation, the images of starvation, all of these things came together. And I can tell you, as a child, I was a reparationist, because I knew that these things were wrong. And whoever is responsible for these crimes must be held to account, because you cannot brush those things under the carpet. You have to hold people to account. And it is our duty to hold them to account. It's our responsibility to hold them to account, because if you don't hold them to account, they will have no respect for you. They will not recognize your dignity. They have no respect for you because you don't respect yourself. And so I think I was a reparationist as a child, and therefore joining in was normal. When I went to Jamaica, I was invited to give a lecture on reparations. This was my first lecture 42 years ago. My first lecture on reparations on the Mona campus. Those of you who know the Mona campus, the Undercroft. It was a celebration of Marcus Messiah Garvey's birthday, and I gave the lecture on reparations. And in this huge place with 200 chairs, there were 11 people. There were 11 people in the audience. We had 200 chairs, 11 people turned up, and all 11 of them were Rastas. All 11 were Rastafari. And then I realized I was now joining the Rastafari in the reparations movement. And I happily joined the Rastafari. When I came home, I joined the Rastafari. And the Rastafari are now a critical part of the global movement. And this is how it is. So I want to thank, again, my editors for getting into my head and coming up with these 3 pillars. But again, my objective, as my father would always say, just get on with it. There's work to be done, get on with it. Stop procrastinating, just get on with it. So wherever I have been, I have tried to get on with it. I observe, I listen, I join forces, I collaborate with everyone, and if there's a movement going on, I put in my 2 cents worth and hope that whatever effort I have made would move the enterprise or the movement along. So, colleagues, I think this is really an overwhelming gesture. It will probably take me about 2 years to read it, but I will make an effort to go through page by page, and I thank you all who have contributed to this effort. I really thoroughly appreciated them. The last time I cried in public as I am now, was when the West Indies lost the series against Australia. And in 1995, when the Australians take away the Sir Frank World Trophy, and that was so painful. But I had company then, because I was sitting with Michael Manley on my left and Clive Lloyd on my right, and the three of us, three grown men crying like little babies at Sabina Park. But that was how it is now. But this one I will do my crying alone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
I got the contributors. They got it. I got it.
Contributors.
Thank you, Professor Sir Hilary. Now, we've met the editors of this wonderful Fesquif, but there are several contributors to this work, and those who are present, could you stand and be acknowledged? All persons who have Thank you. We're now going to make a few presentations. So I now invite, and the Professor Sir Hilary will make these presentations. So we start with the Office of the Principal. So Principal and Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Landis. And Professor Varine.
First one, and then I'll make the first one to the principal, and then Professor Shepherd, you and Dr. Carter can present the others. Thank you, Principal. I appreciate it. Thank you. The perfect door stopper. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, from the Barbados Museum and Historical Society is Kevin Barnum. Professor, go back there. From the Department of the Archives, Karen Proppers. And the Sydney Martin Library, the UWITV Phil campus, Lieutenant Colonel Junior Brown. So, one from the library is here. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Carter. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the end of this ceremony, but before we do so, let me formally say thank you to a number of persons. We would first like to thank the grandparents and parents of Sir Hilary for their wonderful role in rearing such a wonderful scholar. So we will applaud that it can go to the grave. So we thank the grandparents and parents of Sir Hilary. And of course, we would want to thank Lady Beckles, his wife, and his children and grandchildren for loaning him to us and sharing in his academic advocacy and administrative work. So Lady Beckles and children, we thank you. PVC and principal of the Cave campus, Professor Clive Landis, we thank you for hosting this event and bringing your initial greetings. Thank you, sir. To the authors, Dr. Henderson Carter, Professor Vereen Reed, and Dr. Vereen Shepherd, sorry. Look, first time I met you was with Ahmed in Hull, and now I'm naming you Professor Reed, but Professor Vereen Shepherd and Dr. Ahmed Reed for your wonderful work. Thank you. And of course, the several authors that have contributed to this wonderful volume of work. So we thank all of you for your contributions. We'd also like to thank Ian Randall, the publishers, for doing an excellent job. Okay. For the artists this evening, the Pinelands Creative Workshop, who serenade you on arrival, and Dr. the Most Honorable Anthony Gabby Carter for his 3 beautiful renditions, Hilary the Man, Emerton, and The Fisherman. So we thank you for your contributions. And of course, our other contributors, we would like to thank Digicel, Lucy Gaffey of the Caribbean Repair Campaign, and then from the university, the Office of the University Marketing and Communications, Campus Security, the Errol Barris Center for Creative Imagination, the Office of the Principal of the Cave Hill Campus, UWITV, Global, UWI Bookshop. We all would like to thank you for your assistance and contribution here this evening. We would also like to thank the collection Roots by Ras Ilix Hartman. And of course, we would want to thank His Excellency David Commisong for his reflections this evening. And of course, you have been such a beautiful audience. So I must also say, give yourself a round of applause. Thank you for your attendance. And it has truly been a wonderful evening. So I thank you once again, as well as those who had joined us online via UWITV. So thank you all. There will be book signing immediately outside. So this is your opportunity to purchase your Christmas gifts. You know, just so you can, all the books that the bookshops have available, you can purchase so that they can do a reorder. So make sure that the bookshop doesn't have any to take back. And do have a wonderful evening, and Merry Christmas to all of you.